So here's a question for you. If you've read A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, do you consider it tragedy porn? What about this book? What about this one? How about this one? And this one? What about this one? No, I've written a lot about A Little Life over the years, so this isn't a new question, but it always comes up every time I mention it, and I've written about this before as well, so I thought I would talk about it here. Because it, of course, came up when I posted my video about 15 things you may not have known about A Little Life. So just to quickly summarize, A Little Life came out in 2015, and it remains one of the most polarizing books I've seen in the whole online book world. It's about four men who were friends in college, and they're trying to make their way in New York. We meet each of the men in turn, and all seems pretty normal until we get to Jude, who the rest of the novel focuses on. And we learn more about Jude and the deep trauma that he endured as a child and that he's struggling with as an adult. And we slowly learn about his intensely abusive and traumatic childhood. And it's just a very painful book for the characters and the readers as well. Now, this level of pain, as well as the unflinching detail of the abuse that Jude endured, it prompted objections in many readers, while others really felt only the emotions and the empathy of people who were experiencing this alongside him, as well as kind of a new understanding of really the depths of the trauma that some people experience. So what I find interesting about the people who object is that so many of them are expressing disdain for the people who relate more to the empathy and the emotional side of the book. I've seen accusations of voyeurism, exploitation, and just an overall lack of self-awareness and reflection by those people who find meaning in the book. And they say that these readers are not asking themselves the searching questions that, of course, they themselves say that they are asking. So to that, I would say, first of all, let's not grant ourselves a level of a complexity that we don't also grant to other people, because the world is full of thoughtful, reflective people. And I find this to be particularly true in the literary world. Now, I have witnessed people interrogating this book for years. They are reflecting on what it means about them as readers because they find meaning in the book, why it's meaningful, why the author would have written it this way. And I can assure you that very few readers are reading this book and many of the others that I raised as well for entertainment. Books are not just about entertainment. These are not rom-coms, and readers know this. Of course, every reader must decide for themselves what is too much for them and how they feel about authors' depictions of different things and whether they agree with them or not. And if you disagree with them, that's fine. You can raise those concerns. You can discuss it with other people. But also, as I mentioned before, please be sure to grant those people the same level of respect that you are granting yourself. And this really isn't just about A Little Life. Of course, that's what I'm using here as the main sort of example in this discussion. But it's about tragedy and trauma in literature in general. So at what point does it become gratuitous and our reading of it vulgar? Rather than instructive or empathetic. So let's first talk about why we read. Reading is not just about entertainment, as I mentioned. It's also about, again, empathy, understanding, learning, expression, and even appreciation of just the art form of literature. And history and true events inspire countless works of literature. And unfortunately, most of those do involve suffering. And this was real suffering that people actually experienced. As readers, diving into these books gives us little peeks into what these people endured. And fiction allows us to have this perspective, this close perspective, without invading the actual privacy and traumatic memories of the people who experienced the event. Unless, of course, they may be sharing it themselves, as Ishmael Bey did in A Long Way Gone. And I think what makes A Little Life so controversial is that the suffering that Jude endured, so much of it was sexual abuse. And his suffering was just so horrific that it just couldn't be surmounted. And Yanagihara mentioned this herself in that part of her intent was to write a character who does not get better. Now, as a reader, this can be just deeply uncomfortable. We are so accustomed to reading stories of redemption and rescue and happy endings and survival that it's rare that we don't sort of land on some sort of redemption at the end, no matter how much suffering there is in the book. And when you add on the sexual abuse aspect, it's just such a horrific, just deeply personal type of suffering that just sort of amplifies our discomfort with the work. There is absolutely no denying the horrific nature of sexual abuse, and especially the long-term, enduring type of sexual abuse that Jude experienced. And again, I am speaking only as a reader, certainly not as an expert. But I would also argue that really any kind of suffering is deeply personal, whether it happens in a war, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's long-term over centuries like slavery. All of the suffering that's endured by the people who live through it just ends up being very personal. But because we see so many of these things from a historical framework, it feels a little bit more acceptable to us than to dive into this very, very personal story of someone who is enduring private sexual abuse like Jude did in the novel. But really, it's just undeniable that the ways that humans can suffer and the ways that we can inflict suffering on one another just seem endless. So what's the point of it? What's the point of reading it? And really, what's the tipping point? When does it become exploitative? So I would argue that the point of reading about this type of suffering in books is that it takes us deeper. We're not watching Saw here. We're not just watching the misery for the misery. We're joining a character in the moments beyond the suffering. We're witnessing their struggles. We're seeing the lasting effects. We're seeing the ways that they work to survive. And yeah, sometimes we are seeing the redemption, but sometimes we're not. This is the human side of it. And we know these things happen. We see them on the news. They're coldly delivered to us. And we say, oh, how sad. And then we move on to the next thing. We don't have access to the true sufferings of those people. And nor should we. Those sufferings are private. They're not for public consumption. But when we can join a character in the book, we can get a somewhat deeper understanding of what those people may be going through. These characters end up being a proxy through which we can bear witness, we can understand the suffering, and we can build our own empathy. The real people who suffer in these ways do not have the luxury of turning away from it. Now, as a reader, I think that the very least I can do as a human being is to not turn away from it as well. I can do my best to bear witness to what their suffering means and try to understand it. And as readers, we actually get closer to the character's suffering than almost anybody would who is in the real life of somebody who is actually suffering. We live it alongside those characters in ways that friends and family members never do. They don't see the internal struggles. They don't necessarily see the full depths and the effects of events that have caused people in their lives trauma. And this is so realistic to real life. We can almost never know the full depths of other people's pain and what they're carrying with them every day. So I would say that the tipping point, and when we are exploiting the misery, is when the story is just about the misery itself. It's not about the inner life, that those struggles that people work to overcome and how they endure them and how they try to survive and how we as human beings and readers can work to understand them. When it's trauma for the trauma, when it's just about seeing somebody, be cut or be harmed, and that's the end of it, that's when it's exploitative. When it's literature going deeper with the character, that's when it serves a purpose. So what is the purpose? Why is it important to understand the suffering of other people? So understanding the full range of human experience, it affects us. And if it's done in the right way, it affects who we are. Empathy affects everything we do, who we are in the world, how we vote, how we raise our children. It affects the work that we do. It affects how we relate to others. And all I can really say on this is that right now, more than ever, the world needs people reading books that build their empathy. Now, this is kind of another conversation, but in light of this, the current push to ban all of these books in various parts of the country just feels so dangerous. There are people who have suffered in many, many horrific ways who are begging people to read these books, to read books about their suffering and the ways that other people have tormented them or people who came before them. They want readers to understand their experience. They want readers to empathize with them, with their history, so that we can make better choices as a society. In some cases, they are telling us, our children endured this. Our children lived through this. You, and in some cases, your children, can endure reading about it and learning about it so that we can all be more compassionate and make choices that protect the most marginalized and vulnerable among us. So what about the question of whether the suffering is realistic? All I can say to that is that there is a lot of suffering in the world. Some people get more than their fair share of it. Some people spend their entire lives suffering. Other people in the world seem to have a heightened sense of who these damaged people are. They look for them so that they can inflict suffering. This is something that was shown in A Little Life, and it may feel unrealistic to some readers. All I can say is that that's a luxury, that feels unrealistic. And honestly, it's a luxury that things like this have not happened to me as well. But denying that that type of suffering happens to other people does a disservice to the thousands and thousands of people across the world who suffer daily at the hands of others. And there are people, again, every day suffering right in front of us. Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we don't know how to help them, even if we do know. We, as people, as individuals, are imperfect. And the characters depicted in these books who maybe failed Jude in the case of A Little Life, maybe failed him in some way or didn't help him as much as they could, those people are pretty realistic too. Not everybody knows how to help somebody who has the depth of the suffering that Jude endured. So what is our responsibility as readers, as human beings who want to be empathetic in a world full of suffering? So I feel like the very least I can do as a reader who occasionally picks up books like this is to enter this world, to empathize, to understand what they're going through. It's not to act as a voyeur or to marvel at the pain, but as a human being, I never want to become numb to the sufferings of other people. And I feel like this is just a bare minimum that we can do if we're willing to pick up these books in the first place. But sometimes that bare minimum can even lead to more. It can lead to activism. It can lead to voting in a certain way. It can lead us to volunteer or, day to day as we encounter situations where somebody might be struggling. It can lead us to stand up for them or to help them in various ways. I think the key with books like these is to approach them with intention, understand what we're reading, and decide our purpose in reading them. Now, it doesn't mean it's not worth questioning the author's depiction of anything. We've seen in the past that certain authors have been called to task for their depiction of certain things, and those books have been rightly called out. Whether that's justified in the case of Yanagihara, that is sort of up for debate. A lot of people have different interpretations and different feelings on that. And I am certainly not one to say that she depicted everything properly, that she did everything perfectly in this book. There are things that I can't speak to that I've seen raised about people's problems with the books, and that's fine. That's fine to have those conversations. But what I'm trying to get at here is less about whether the author was correct in her depictions, and more about what we readers owe to each other when we're engaging in conversations about why we read and what we get out of these certain books, and what we owe to ourselves as readers when we are putting ourselves through a very difficult book like A Little Life or any of the others that I shared before. So now I would really like you to weigh in. What is the purpose of reading about suffering? When does it tip into exploitation? And what is our responsibility as readers when we engage with these books and with each other when we're discussing them? So I hope you will weigh in with your thoughts on this and have respectful conversation. Thank you for watching.